Well, right off the bat, I think we've got to comment about this story that it's not local, but it certainly has gotten the attention of the entire world, and that includes, I believe, as well, people on the local level. I happened to see not the entire video yesterday, but I saw a series of still photographs of the Jordanian pilot being burned alive by the ISIS terrorists. And calling them terrorists might be a little bit too nice in this situation. These are the same people your president last summer called a JV squad, and they continue to just belie belief with what they do. The whole notion that they would enjoy burning someone alive in a cage and filming it for their own enjoyment tells you we are dealing with some very sick, twisted puppies in that part of the world. Now, I'm waiting for your local newspaper, that is the Times News, to head down to the Islamic Center. They were there just a couple of weeks ago and reporting how, oh, well, everyone here says this is not really our faith. All right, well, let's get back down there and find out if any of those folks are willing to make a condemnation about what took place. Because you don't hear that very often from the Islamic world. The president of Jordan, the king, that is, King Abdullah, he has gone ahead. Is it Abdullah? He is the grandson, I believe, of his country's founder. He has gone out and actually hanged two terrorists in his country, not maybe personally, but he has had that done in order to send a strong message that it's not going to be tolerated any longer. And in his country, his decision is being applauded. Of course, we don't do that sort of thing in the United States. We issued a strongly worded note yesterday from Secretary of State John Kerry, known, of course, for his bravery and his astuteness, and a man with a very long face. Take him seriously. And they issued an objection and said that it was naughty, naughty, don't do that again. So here we are all over having this similar debate. The beheadings continue. We're almost inured to those. And now they're roasting people. Where does it end? This is they've set a standard that can only grow more gruesome as time progresses. Adolf Hitler was said to have enjoyed watching the conspirators who tried to assassinate him hang from meat hooks. He had it filmed so he could watch it later, and he was said to have enjoyed that. We're dealing with people with a very similar mindset. And I don't know what's going to happen here, but I would think that at least some folks in the Islamic world would finally say enough on their own and maybe take up arms and deal with these internal threats. Because the American people are pretty well done with that. We've spent our emotional chips in this game after 9/11. That's nearly 15 years ago. So I don't think you're going to see a whole heck of a lot of that happening. But where are the local people who were quoted in that newspaper story a couple of weeks ago coming out now and saying this has got to stop? How many of them are willing to put on a uniform and go stop it? How many of them are willing to back up what the King of Jordan has done? You don't hear it from them. Oh, they talk about being victims all the time and how we shouldn't blame them for what other people do, but they don't come forward and say this has got to stop. If they tell you it's wrong, they always qualify it with a but. However, people are mean to us, and therefore we have to take some action. I guess that's the feeling, that it's some sort of a reparations tab for decades or centuries of colonialism in that part of the world. You're joining Bill Colley this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program today, and I'm curious to know what your reaction was if you saw any of those gruesome pictures or the video at 736-0300, 736-0300. Here's something to ponder, and maybe this is what I'm looking for. Do we go in ourselves after what we've already gone through in that part of the world and clean this mess up? Or do we find someone else who can actually do the job? My concern is, and I am one of those people, and you've heard me on this show now long enough, a little over a month, that you understand I have a strong libertarian streak that believes we cannot police the world and that we do not need to have bases and military installations all over the world. On the other hand, this is a movement. This is an ideology that we're fighting. And unlike a country that grabs your capital and maybe some land and tries to then colonize that, this is an ideology that is seeping all over the world. You have Wahhabists. They're the extremists out of Saudi Arabia who are now in the prisons, and they go there intentionally. They get caught, they get sent to prison in the United States so they can then start proselytizing among the prison population. That prison population gets released and it's radicalized. And it has converted to that faith. And these people are now wandering the streets of our country. And I guess I'm raising the question, how long is it before we start seeing similar acts of violence. There was a story yesterday that I happened to see while I was just wrapping up the job, and it came from an organization that tracks these types of things. It's called Accuracy in Media, and a writer was pointing out that in England, they're pretty much done for now because of unbridled immigration. Also in England, the folks who are coming from that part of the world and settling in England and are demanding that their own customs be acknowledged and recognized, they're all signing up for welfare. And they're all claiming that that it's owed them. They're signing up for welfare. What happens, though, is a man takes 4 wives and has multiple children with her. Their British birth rate is below 2 children on average among the Caucasian population. So you've got all of these newcomers from North Africa, from Pakistan, from the Middle East coming in, 4 wives, pumping out 6, 8, 10 kids, and then all going on welfare, bankrupting the state, but also subsuming the state, because in a couple more generations, they will be the dominant majority. And that is the plan. And when Europe falls, France has already fallen. Let's not kid ourselves about that. But when Europe falls, and you'll have maybe Germany in the middle, but even Germany is dealing with all of these issues. Norway, Sweden, Finland, they've all been overrun by people coming from these countries too. And they did it because they said it was the right thing to do. Well, after World War II, we have to show how nice we are. So we'll just allow these people to come in and take over our lands. When Europe is gone, America will truly stand alone. And if you think about it, are you safe in a place such as Idaho? I would say you're safer than maybe New York City, or Boston, or Detroit, or Seattle, or San Francisco, or Los Angeles. However, I was stunned when I heard those numbers that there are at least 1,000 people of that particular ideology who have now settled in this area, just in the Twin Falls area, in the last 15 years. And I can remember when I first came here to take this job, and I was sitting in here, and I was talking with Jill one morning, and the subject came up about how many Jewish people live in the area. And she said, virtually none. Virtually none. And then you've got all those people out there who are essentially post-Christian, which is why a lot of your churches are empty now on weekends. Lots of churches, lots of empty space. So the group that is growing and growing by leaps and bounds, even in southern Idaho, happens to be this group. And I know people say, oh, the Somalis had it really rough over there, so we have to bring them here. And, all right, it makes us all feel warm and fuzzy, doesn't it? But I don't know at this point that we can any longer trust these people. There was, and I'm being as honest as I can about this, there was a state legislator in Texas last week, and she's taking some heat because she said these people then really should swear loyalty to our way of life versus Sharia. And of course, she's now being mocked by the American left, and they're calling her a bigot, and they're saying that she needs to resign. She's trying to protect her own culture, my friends, and I don't see anything wrong with that. It's gotten us quite far. I don't see why we have any need to shelve that and then adopt someone else's to make them feel better about themselves. They're conning us. That's what's taking place. It's 8:16 now, 43 at our studios, looking for some great weather if you like it a little warmer over the next few days. It may be wet for much of today, though, and for a bit of tomorrow. But then coming up over the weekend, it looks like we have some sunshine with temperatures approaching 60. I also should note that if you'd like to reach our program today, 736-0300, and you can also reach me by dropping me an email, and my email address is bill.colley, and I'll spell that, Colley, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And I believe we have a telephone caller joining us this morning at 8:17. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's on your mind?
Well, Bill, I have to agree a lot with you. This is Pat, and it might sound racist in a sense, but Muslims are like a cancer. You allow them in, and they just slowly take over until they choke the life out of those that were previously there.
I wouldn't make that argument until what I've seen happen in Europe, and what I've seen happening in Europe is just almost a planned effort to do that. And that's why the rest of the world has to take notice. And if this is becoming the standard for that faith, that they're going to roast people they don't like, roast them alive, then we've got to start taking this much more seriously.
Well, it's a sad situation where we all have this guilt, like, well, everybody should not be treated so bad. We should help everybody do better. But when they come here, you do not swear allegiance to our country or our way of life. One time there was one of the ladies of that faith was in a store and she didn't have enough money to buy some groceries. And so I offered to pay the difference for her. And she said no, and that was fine. And after she walked out the door, the lady that was checking me out was a Christian from those countries. And she said that if her husband had known that I had talking to her, he would be required by the law of his church to beat her severely for doing so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so this is America. This is not slavery.
Look, they had a prophet in that faith, their only prophet, who married himself off when he was in his 50s to a 7-year-old girl. They really have to start asking themselves some serious questions about modernity and when they're going to get with the program and start coming out of the caves and out of the dark ages.
Well, I think that we've allowed the cancer to enter this country, and I don't know if anyone's got the guts to take what's going to take to correct it if it comes to that point. I fear for our children.
The last man who got close enough to the presidency to do that was Pat Buchanan about 20 years ago, and unfortunately, we won't be seeing him do that again. And he's been marginalized by the libbies in the mainstream media and the squealing academics, so they can silence any dissent along those lines.
Yes, it's a sad situation. Those who have the guts to say something get prosecuted to the point where they have to go hide, and that's how that religion works. They take, like I said, it's just a cancer, and there's only one way to cure a cancer, and it isn't nice.
And I thank you for the call. Lots of useful idiots out there on the American left, working in academia, working in government, and especially in establishment media, who all somehow think that we're all going to just dance around the maypole together and all be so happy once we all mix together. I'm sorry, but Buchanan made a great point one time. One of his recent books, I was reading it. He said he keeps hearing all of these people say, diversity makes us stronger. And he said, where's their evidence? Provide some evidence. They have none. None. It's just a bromide they throw out there, and they hope everyone accepts it so they can continue to get away with the destruction of this culture. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Also got to talk to you today. One of President Obama's allies turning on him when it comes to unemployment numbers. Anyone who's lost a job in the last few years and perhaps lost one 15, 25, 30 years ago notices it's not as easy to go find a job as it used to be. Even trying to just walk into a place and say, I'd like to, meet someone to talk about a job and fill out an application, they give you a website address and say, go there. So you can't even try to make a personal impression. You don't have that opportunity any longer. Things, we are told in this country, though, are getting much better. All you have to do is listen to all of the collective media types who are down on their knees performing a Lewinsky for the folks at the White House perpetually. Campaign appendages, just the ongoing campaign from the White House, and minions, whatever you want to call them. They're just there simply to repeat the talking points. They're telling us things are so great now. The sun is coming up. It's morning in America. Unemployment has dropped to 5.6%. All right, let's take a look at those numbers. There is a fellow by the name of Jim Clifton, writing at Gallup. Gallup is not a right-of-center organization. It's a polling organization. Fairly standard work that they do. They ask people questions, they give out numbers, and they've been doing this for decades. One of the most respected polling organizations in America. And the headline yesterday was The Big Lie, 5.6% unemployment. This was at Gallup's website. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 43 at our studios. It's 8:25. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. He says if you perform a minimum of 1 hour of work in a week and are paid at least $20, maybe someone pays you to mow their lawn, for instance, you're not officially counted as unemployed in the much reported 5.6%. Few Americans, he writes, know this. Think about that for a moment. You're looking for a little work to just sort of get a little money in your pocket and help, your family along with groceries. You mow the neighbor's lawn, your neighbor gives you $20 for doing it had to be a big yard, I suppose, for that cost. And then all of a sudden you don't get unemployment for that week and you're not counted in the figures. Yet another figure, he writes, of importance that doesn't get much press. Those working part-time but wanting full-time work. If you have a degree in chemistry or math and are working 10 hours part-time because it is all you can find, in other words, you are severely underemployed, the government doesn't count you in the 5.6%. Few Americans, he writes, know this. Again, he's just repeating that line. And there are a couple of pages of these things that he's breaking down. Do I have to go on, or are you getting the point? You're getting the idea, I would hope. Gallup defines, and he's talking about his organization, a good job is 30 plus hours per week for an organization that provides a regular paycheck. Right now, the U.S. is delivering at a staggeringly low rate of 44%. That's of the entire workforce. Now, for those of you public school graduates listening today, 44% is well under half. We need, the writer says, that to be 50% and a bare minimum of 10 million new good jobs to replenish America's middle class. And the writer says, I hear all the time that, quote, unemployment is greatly reduced, but the people aren't feeling it, unquote. When the media, talking heads in the White House and Wall Street reporting the truth, or start reporting the truth, the percent of Americans in good jobs, jobs that are full-time and real, then we will quit wondering why Americans aren't, quote, feeling, unquote, something that doesn't remotely reflect the reality in their lives. And we will also quit wondering what hollowed out the middle class. Isn't it becoming more and more like the Soviet Union, where the government would say, well, this has been our productivity and we've done this and we've given this to our people. And everyone knew it was a joke. In other words, the government would speak one thing and tell everyone that was the truth, but everyone knew it wasn't at all true. And it eventually led to the collapse of that system. It's 8:28. We have a caller with us on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio13.com. You're on the air, and what's on your mind?
Well, good morning. I think we're about the same age. And I remember there being all kinds of work. Young kids, 16 years old, could get basic jobs at a gas station, grocery store, or wherever, and then they'd move on up to higher paying jobs. But our government, in their infinite wisdom, has slowly just forced all these companies out of business or out of the country, and then wonder why we're unemployed. It's insanity, that this is going on, and everybody's going, huh? I don't understand.
Your own government has made laws and regulations that make it easier for companies that were once based in America to do business elsewhere and then turn around and sell us those cheap products from overseas. And
but when we were younger, we made everything we consumed, we made. What do we make now?
Well, yogurt.
Yogurt. I mean, we used to make TVs and clock radios and steel and iron and wood, and now everything comes from China.
I hear you. I thank you much for the call. We've got to check some messages from some of our fine sponsors in just a moment. My uncle fed a family and had several beautiful old antique cars. He ran 3 television sales and service stores, sold appliances too. All American-made products at the time, all made by people scattered in factories all across this country. All gone. All gone. So is his business. 8:30. We've got more coming up on this very same topic. In fact, are you feeling it? We'll know more in just a moment. Ah, yes, the official theme song of the White House. It's probably why they're legalizing dope all over the country, figuring you won't notice what's going on if you're perpetually stoned on the ganja. 8:34. We're going to talk about that in the next hour because there is a college that is now teaching marijuana business courses. I kid you not. It's not far from a radio station that I interviewed at once, owned by Pat Sajak, who I should note is a non-dope smoking conservative. But we'll talk about that a bit later. 43. 8:34. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story, and I thank you for joining us. We were just talking about some of the phony economic numbers being promoted not only by President Obama, the White House, but also by all of his appendages in media, those people who are working in the propaganda wing, what Rush Limbaugh refers to as state-controlled media. And it may as well be. As I said, it rings like the old Soviet Union. They tell you one thing, you know it isn't true, and then they complain that you're not buying into the lie. And liberals wonder why those of us on the right are suspicious of their motives. Because, of course, in their world, the end justifies the means. It doesn't matter how many people you have to crawl over to actually get there. There's more on this from a guy by the name of Peter Morisi. Now, Peter Morisi, sometimes you see him on television selling copier machines. He's actually one of the nation's top economists, and he's writing in the Washington Times today. The headline is Obama's Second Age of Pericles. And he says, other than falling gas prices, which at the moment may not be falling much longer, the realities of everyday life are moribund. Rising food prices and local taxes, expensive compulsory health insurance, stagnant wages, and a jobs market that never seems to get much better for very long. And he said, evidence is mounting that apprehensive Americans are using money saved at the gas pump to pay down debt and shore up savings rather than spending to stimulate the economy. America looks so good only because Europe looks so bad. China's growth machine is spurting oil, and Japan, where women are not having many babies and men abhor immigration, is imploding. So he's breaking it down for what's going on around the world. If this continues, I've got to recommend a book to all of you that I read many, many years ago. In the late 1990s, I was working at a TV station in a really small city, relatively close to the East Coast. And not far from where I lived was a Barnes & Noble, and I heard a review one day about a book called The Fourth Turning. And as I was listening to the authors talk about their research, I was just absolutely amazed. They have traced back in our culture all the way back into the 1400s in England, and then they followed it from England to the English arriving in North America, the colonization of the United States, as well as the growth of the United States as an independent nation. A turning is something they define as a 20-year period. The fourth turning then follows every 80 years. And in their book, they have traced that the Western world, that is especially the English-speaking world, has faced a great crisis on average of every 80 years. And you think about that for a moment. 80 years ago today, 1935, we were still trying to come out of the Great Depression. 80 years before that, you're looking at a similar type of a crisis going on in this country. 80 years before that, similar crisis. You match it up to this way. World War II, 40 years before World War II, or 80 years before World War II, they had the Civil War. 80 years before that, the American Revolution. And you can keep tracing all of this back, crisis after crisis. But what's interesting is every time there's an economic crisis, every 80 years, there is usually a tremendous war that follows. And it can be something along the lines of a civil war, a battle between various peoples, within their own country, or some other greater challenge. Not Nazis this time, maybe pilot-burning Muslims over in the Middle East that we'll have to fight. But we are there at the cusp of that fourth turning again because of and this book was written in the 1990s. I drove down to my local Barnes & Noble at the time. I picked up a copy of it, and I read through it. And big book, and it's not that. These guys are academics who are writing this book. They're not writing as a novel to entertain you. So I had to go through a lot of charts and look through a lot of those things, but I read it in a matter of a few days. And I would highly recommend, you could probably still find that book. Go to one of your big booksellers, maybe even in a used bookstore. You could probably still find that book. It's called The Fourth Turning. And I'll tell you, it is a tremendous eye-opener about what we're going through right now. The thing is, the people who are actually in charge in government, they didn't read that book. Because they work on the old joke about the Clinton White House in that era when that book came out. And I heard this too one day during an interview with some folks actually working in the Clinton White House is they didn't really have an economic plan. They just got up in the morning and said, all right, what are we going to do today? And that was the approach. And I think it's commonly the approach to government today, that it's simply a triage. But I think that all of these writers are warning us, despite what they're telling us in media about how good things are, I think that all of these writers are trying to tell us, look, there are some structural issues that we haven't addressed. We're back perhaps in another housing bubble. We've got an education bubble in secondary, or not secondary, but university educations. We've got all of these things going on, and we've got volatile fuel prices. We've got economies around the world wobbling right now. You just cannot sit here. You've got to plan. You've got to look out for yourself. Make sure you stock up on what you're going to need and do the best you can to take care of yourselves to ride this one out. 20 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Oh, some folks in Oregon who refuse to bake a cake for some lesbians are going to have to give up their life savings to the lesbians. More details on that on the way on Top Story. Remember the story about the couple in Oregon who refused to bake a cake for a lesbian wedding. Well, they don't have the store anymore. They've moved their business to their own home. But a court is going to decide on a monetary settlement in just a few weeks. This comes from the Associated Press. A hearing is scheduled in March to determine how much in damages two Oregon bakers owe a lesbian couple for refusing to bake them a wedding cake in 2013. I heard a figure this morning, I saw it online, in fact, that they're looking at $150,000 as a minimum because these people had their feelings hurt. So, it's against the law to hurt people's feelings any longer, and this is what we're talking about in this situation. And it mentions that the controversy began when these two women went to the sweet cake shops seeking a wedding cake. When they learned that there were two brides, Erin and Melissa Klein, refused to make a cake. Now, that's due to their Christian beliefs. But apparently that's not good enough. Your Christian beliefs have to be set aside. What these people really want you to do is come over and crawl into bed with them to make them feel better. And if you don't do it, it's going to cost you your life savings. Bill Colley with you this morning. I've got a caller with us on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you're on the air.
No, Bill. I think that my biggest problem with this is, let's say me and you didn't like me too much. So instead of me trying to do something nice to you or ignoring you, I forced you to do something. It cost you your life savings. Would that make you like me more or less?
Probably much less.
Right. So they're defeating their own purpose, and they're making more people mad, and it's unruly. Now, at the beginning of your show, you talked about the cancer of the Muslim.
I didn't use the word cancer. A caller did.
Okay. Well, let's say we allowed this virus into our own politics called liberals. I'm not saying Democrats. I'm saying progressive people that want government to take care of everything else. And every time they do something for us, they actually take away some of our freedom. And people don't understand that. They like sitting on their butt, watching TV, getting free money, which they think is free, but I'm working hard to give them that money.
Well, I do remember that survey done about 10 years ago of college students. I'm sure that they haven't changed much, that said that they were willing overwhelmingly to give up their right to vote in exchange for having their college debt forgiven. It just tells you that we've jumped the shark in this country, and we now are willing to all be dependents and be led around by the nose.
Yeah, I kind of blame the parents. I mean, my parents brought me up in a wholly different way, to make your own way, and anything that happens to you is your fault. So, and these people feel like nothing is their fault, and everything should be given to them.
We are in a what is called, I guess, by Huxley, a brave new world. I thank you much for the call, sir. It's 8:47, and you can reach the program today at 736-0300. That is 736-0300. My email address is bill.colley, that's Colley, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. I was looking at the story. What else are they going to be able to force Christians to do? When you think about it, what happens if someone comes in and they want several cakes for a polygamist wedding? Or two people come in, a brother and sister, and say they want a cake for their wedding. Why do you have to acknowledge this and do this? You know what? There will be some other cake store that would be willing to bake you a cake. That's called capitalism. Someone will take advantage of that. There was a time in this country when people of color couldn't play Major League Baseball. So some very enterprising people created a very competitive and very good baseball league and allowed those players to play in that league and did quite well. I'm not saying it was right, but you open the door for other opportunities. And the other part of this is bake your own darn cake then. No one needs to do it for you. 8:48. You're up next. Good morning. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. Hello?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Hey, Bill, I am very upset over this situation in Oregon. And I am very tired of the minority pushing those people, such as myself, who's a Christian, a very devout Christian, around saying, if I don't get my way, I'm going to punish you. And I'm a baby boomer. This all started back in the 60s when everything was for me. Me, I. And, of course, this is against my Christian beliefs, about self-centeredness. And I'm just sick and tired of, and this all starts with the president. Our president, to me, is a narcissistic lion coward. And I will say those words again because I feel that he is really the instigator of all of this.
I think that he's not alone. I think that it's his wing of his party that have been trying to do this for years.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Go all the way back to George McGovern and some of those people in the 70s and late 1960s and their behavior. And, let's make sure everyone feels good about themselves and we'll force it. In fact, if people don't want to acknowledge that. And you see it in schools, though, too, where we're spending less time teaching the 3 R's, and instead we're telling people that they have to be nice to everybody and respect everybody. And that so people come out of school. I used to hire young people back in the late 90s and early 2000s for TV jobs. They would come out of college and they would sit there and tell me how much they wanted to be respected. And I used to just say, hey, you do the right work, you do it well, you'll get some respect. But up until now, you haven't earned any. Well, they've been taught all the way through school, from kindergarten right up through college, that everyone is going to be nice to them and, quote, respect them and not hurt their feelings. And they thought that was going to be how it was in the real world. Boy, did they get a rude surprise. Of course, now looking at this story, they probably could have sued me for hurting their feelings.
Yeah, you see, this is what bothers me, okay? My feelings got hurt. Where is this going to go from here? Somebody's feelings get hurt because of some situation that happened in life, and they're going to take them to court?
They're going to outlaw your Christian beliefs. I saw a column today in a British newspaper just tearing apart Mike Huckabee because he has some traditional Christian beliefs and how he believes, how he looks at the world and thinks women should behave and how people should speak and curse less. All of those things Mom and Dad taught me were right, are no longer right. Apparently, liberals want you to curse a lot. Liberals want you to fornicate a lot. Liberals want you to fornicate in same-sex relationships a lot. I guess that way we're supposed to better understand the other side. And that Bible is just a bunch of hokum to them. Of course, they won't go out and they won't say that about the Quran because they fear the results of what would happen if they tried to play that card. But they know that we're not going to respond in the same manner, so the bullying is going to continue.
This is very true. This is very true. The scripture teaches that Christians are going to be persecuted. And we know that we'll have better days in heaven than we will here on earth. But I'm just so saddened. I'm a Vietnam vet. I came home in December of 1968, landed at Travis Air Force Base. It took me to San Francisco International Airport. What a culture shock. I got spit on. We got names called at us, baby killers, et cetera, all because we stood up for our country. I didn't want to go to war. I didn't like it.
Yeah, that era was the beginning of the end. You really have to trace it. You have to go back to the middle to late 1960s. It all started to come apart. The media jumped on board. Academia, of course, was willing to jump on board, and there was just this great spite for any tradition that had existed in this country prior. Thank you much for your call, sir, and good hearing from you. Got another caller joining us this morning, 8:53 now on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX, 43 at our studios, and you're up next, and you're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. I understand everybody blaming all this on the liberals. They have it coming. There's no doubt about that. But you look at what happened with the last abortion bill in Congress, it's obvious that it's not just liberals. It's all across the board in Washington, D.C. The fact is, when these people turn against God's church, the Lord said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. This false doctrine that we're supposed to pay taxes to support this, they take those taxes and turn them back to destroy God's church. There's something going on here, it's not right.
These Republicans, first of all, they talk a good game. But in reality, a lot of them are just simply, they're wearing the Republican jersey, but they're playing for the other team. Number two, they're all running around afraid of what establishment media might say about them if they actually take a stand on any of this. So, the cowardice is just part of the game.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't think
Bill.
Thank you. I don't think it's going to get to any better anytime soon. John Boehner will talk a good game. He's one of these guys, he runs up to the line and says, if you cross this line, there's going to be a problem. Someone crosses the line, so Boehner backs up a couple of yards and says, all right, if you cross this line, there's going to be a problem. Someone crosses the line, Boehner backs up a couple of more yards. This is the type of leadership we have in the so-called opposition. You don't really have any leadership. I mean, secretly, and Boehner, I was at the March for Life, and he was one of the keynote speakers a few years ago. And I stood there right by the stage listening to him, and I thought, wow, maybe I've got this guy wrong. But as I said, I've met him a few years before that down on the House floor. We can shake, which immediately left me thinking that there really isn't much to the guy, just a big empty suit. And well, you know, we then they start in with that. We've got to be the representatives of all the people. Well, all the people didn't vote for you. And when you came out looking for my vote, you told me that you would follow my beliefs. You would do what I wanted you to do. Therefore, I ask you to start doing that. But see, they are worried about that media pressure. Because if you're a Democrat and you get elected, that's a mandate, even if it was just with a plurality. It's a mandate, and you're allowed to go do what you want to do. If you're a Republican, you could get elected with 80%, and they'll say, yes, but you need to represent all the people. In other words, I don't care what they believe, just as long as you do what we want you to do. But they've got to stop the cowardice. They've got to start. Ronald Reagan, and he may not have been as effective as conservatives believe he was, but at least he had an ability to stand before the media and just look at them. When he called them sons of bitches under his breath, that wasn't a mistake. And he knew that the people who were going to hear that around the country were going to go, yep, he's right. And when he said, we begin bombing in 5 minutes, off the cuff before a presidential, radio address, and it got picked up by media, that wasn't a mistake. He was basically signaling the Russians, don't mess with me. And he would go out in front of the media. How about, I paid for this microphone, Mr. Breen. I think the guy's actual name was Green, but, he let them know right away, you're not going to bully me or push me around. And the people loved it. Why can't we get that any longer? And he would just come out and say, the liberals would have us believe, and everyone knew exactly what he was talking about. He was saying that the liberals are full of baloney, and we all knew it. So he was one of the few people in my lifetime who said the emperor is wearing no clothes when it comes to the American left. We can't find anyone to do that any longer. Mitt Romney would be president today, but he decided to keep kowtowing and apologizing every time he got criticized. When he said 47% of the public are moochers, he was darn right, and he should have stuck to his guns. And just said, I don't care if your feelings are hurt, then go take a Zoloft. We need someone to speak directly. Winston Churchill used to say, when he was criticized sometimes for his bluntness, he used to say that people can take it. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it for them. I'm going to tell them just how bad things actually are, because we need to have that credibility. And we're not seeing it any longer. We're not seeing anyone out there who's got a pair that can come forward. Again, yesterday, after this poor fellow was burned to death in that cage, and we got a strongly worded protest from the American State Department. Wow, that's like getting a paddling, isn't it? I'm sure that over there in the ISIS camp, they're saying, oh no, what are we going to do? Strongly worded protest. Oh, the pain, the agony, I can't stand it any longer. You know what? You stick one up their stovepipe and you blow them to bits. That's what they're going to understand. 8:58. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. And I only had 2 cups of coffee this morning. It's amazing, but a good night's sleep will do that for you. I've got a lot more to talk about. As I said yesterday, I've had all my shots. How about you? Well, as it turns out, those campaign appendages for the Democrat Party in American media are twisting this story about measles and vaccinations to make it look, of course, as if people who are opposed to their God in the White House have somehow flipped their lids for good. But as it turns out, both President Obama and Hillary Clinton once raised the same concerns. No. What's an omission? It's called a lie in my church. We've got more coming up following news from Fox at 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. Some of you who may have been tuned in last week on the 28th of January, you would have heard my friend Colonel Steve Heil, who had been on the Space Shuttle Challenger Commission, talking about that experience. Of course, his background after 20 years in the Air Force it's much more extensive than just that one particular event. He helped plan the inauguration in 1985, January of 1985. He was also the Pentagon liaison to Capitol Hill for many years from the Air Force, and has had just a tremendous career behind him. But he sent me this morning, and it's a picture of that poor Jordanian pilot who had fallen to his knees as he was burning to death. You want to talk about a brave man. As the flames approached him, there's an actual still photo where you see his arms up, knowing what's coming. But he didn't appear to be, shouting or begging for mercy, and he walked to his death. And there's a photograph that Steve has. It's a close-up photo where the flames have now driven him down to his knees, and he is burning and scorched while his arms are still stretched out, his fingers splayed, but he's burning away on his way to his death in obviously excruciating pain. And Steve includes this commentary. If Barack Obama even has the guts to watch this and still refuses to comprehend or admit we are at war with radical Islam, then it is the ultimate proof that he is incompetent and not fit nor qualified to be president of the United States. Steve also writes, and to Hillary Clinton I would say, if she still thinks that we should empathize with and try to better understand these barbarians, then she is the ultimate fool and also isn't fit, qualified, or competent to be president of the United States. For the second time in our lifetime, we are confronted with pure evil, first the Nazis and now Islamists. So there you have it. You have it from someone who had been on the inside too as well, and I think has a very good understanding of what he's talking about. It is just absolutely disgusting. Now, the president today made some comment about, oh, they're barbarians. Yeah, all right. Now that you've hurt their feelings a little bit, what more are you going to do? Oh, tomorrow I'm going to call them mean and nasty and cowardly. Oh, yes, and then my wife's not going to wear a veil again. We'll show them, we'll give them the what for. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com at 10 minutes after 9 o'clock. Good morning to you, and what's on your mind?
Well, you always have to wonder why he is so catering and sympathetic towards the Muslim Brotherhood, and he doesn't want to call ISIS what it really is. He calls it ISIL. And then, of course, online there's been some news stories about him really being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and I didn't know, obviously, these things have to be taken with a grain of salt, but I was just curious as to what you thought.
Well, I don't know that he's a member of it. I think he is sympathetic. The other day, they hosted some of these people at the State Department, and after they left the State Department, then they pronounced that they were going to go forward with jihad. So, here we bring them right into the center of our government and say, sit down, let's have a parley, and then they walk out and say, yes, and who can we kill next? It just shows you the naivete or the stupidity or the plain evil on the side of our own government at the moment in this situation.
Well, he's truly, in my opinion, we keep calling him naive, a hack, but the truth of the matter is I truthfully believe he's an anarchist trying to tear this country apart, and we sit here and allow him. He lies with such unbelievable regularity that it's like lying doesn't matter anymore in America.
Like Hillary Clinton, congenital liar. Yes.
Yeah, they're certifiably certifiable in that respect. And so you say, well, how long can you keep letting this guy off the hook? But you see, even if we do try to hold him accountable, who is going to do it for us? Because we've got nobody with any kind of, what, to do anything, it seems, except for maybe Ted Cruz, I guess. And but you see, it is infuriating beyond belief.
Well, Ted Cruz, and the problem with Ted Cruz is his Canadian birth, and after what we've gone through with our complaints about where Obama may have been born, I thank you for the call. You're probably going to hear people, bring that up immediately with Cruz if he does indeed decide to run for president. His father, of course, was from Cuba. His mother was from the United States, but he was born in Canada while his dad was on mission work there, and that may preclude Ted Cruz from actually having an opportunity. Mitt Romney's dad had been born in Mexico back in 1968. No one was even talking about those things. I think the word he was looking for is someone in government needs to have a little intestinal fortitude. And nobody in government has intestinal fortitude. I have been reading, it sat on my bookshelf at home for a good 10, 12 years. The first installment in the Liberation trilogy written by Rick Atkinson called An Army at Dawn, about the war in North Africa. When the United States finally put troops down and started fighting the Germans, and it was not pretty. It was not easy. And today we would have packed up and gone home because of pressure from the media and academia, and we would have allowed the Nazis perhaps to go on and rule the world. It saddens me the direction we've gone in this country, because despite the tremendous setbacks they had, they'd go into battle, and the casualties would number 1,800, and half of those would be killed, and many more would be wounded, burned, and it was terrible carnage. But they kept going because they had a mission and they believed in it. And we don't have that unity of belief anymore. We sat there and let Hillary Clinton tear down a government that had finally become friendly to us in Libya. And our reward for that, for actually supporting the insurgents, was that they went out and killed 4 of our people at an American consulate. And yet we continue to believe that all we have to do is be nice to them and, help them out in these situations, and that they're going to go, gee, willikers, aren't those Americans just great? No, it's not happening. And again, it shows you the foolishness and the insanity of doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for some different sort of result. And no one in media is willing to call them out, or at least rarely. And then it happens, and for a couple of days, there's a little bit of rumbling about it. I keep reading how he is the most difficult president for people in media to deal with in our lifetime, that he's not as transparent as he promised. Some people are talking about how bad it has been for reporters who've crossed him. He has actually had his government spy on some of those reporters and some of their family members as well. And yet they still get down on their knees and bow toward him when he comes into a room. What in Hades is wrong with these people? 9:15. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 44 right now. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I should point out, newsradio1310.com allows you to listen to us anywhere around the world. That is, of course, until February 26th, when President Obama's FCC is expected to clamp down on the internet. In fact, there's a story in the venerable New York Times, the Bible of American liberalism, about that very hearing coming up. They're going to call the internet a utility. That way they're going to be able to clamp down on dissent. You see, they're going to regulate it and say, this might hurt somebody's feelings, so this website has to go. We're headed for that, folks, and you've got media just whistling along past the graveyard with him. Once more, whatever country we thought we grew up in is gone. Your liberties are pretty much trashed. And it's all for show any longer. It's just one big TV show to keep you entertained. Bread and circuses. Give you some cable TV, give you a bag of Doritos, and just keep you docile. Maybe give you a vaccine, too, as well, that will keep you docile. No, that wouldn't happen. I'm going to talk a little bit this hour about that issue about vaccinations. We have had these screaming memes in media jumping all over prospective Republican candidates for president who've raised some concerns about vaccines. And, well, they're talking about bad science. That's been disproved. And, they're just trying to whip up extremism in this country. Rand Paul is Dr. Rand Paul. He's just not somebody off the turnip truck. What he was saying, and he has gotten his vaccines, his children have gotten their vaccines, but what he was saying is, it should be your choice as a parent whether you vaccinate or not. Now, the school may say that you can't bring your kids to school if they haven't had their vaccinations. Good. Then homeschool them. Find an alternative. See how the government takes that. They won't like that whatsoever. What they're trying to do is push everyone into a corner and get everyone to do as they say so they can eventually have that total control. So we've got these people hammering these politicians saying, oh, how could they bring this up? And they're going to discourage people from getting vaccines and we're all going to die. What they're trying to do is cover up the cause of the measles outbreak. That peace train that rambled up from Honduras and Guatemala and through Mexico last year and brought, what was it, thousands of children here. And somebody out there was making sure that they arrived here, and then we dispersed them all around the country. And we haven't had a measles problem here since, 2000 or so? It had vanished in this country, and now all of a sudden we have an outbreak? It's because of those liberal Democrats and Marxist-Leninists who wanted to bring those kids here so they could further break down this system. And in order for us not to pay attention to that reality, they've got to say, oh, Rand Paul, he's just a troglodyte. He's living out in la-la land. 9:18, you're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's up with you?
Hey, Bill, just a question for you. It's Wednesday, and they used to do State of the City all the time. Are we not doing that anymore?
Well, they're just trying to work out some details on it, as I understand. And I chatted with Don Hall a few weeks ago over coffee, and so we'll likely see them back. But we've just got to get everybody back into the actual schedule and who's going to show up on a particular day, because as I understand, it was done on a rotating basis.
That'd be great. I'd love to hear more about the city too. So
Yeah, me too. Thank you much for the call, sir. Could have been a plant. We've had the how shall we put it, the diplomatic overtures already made. It's 9:19. You're listening to Bill Colley, and the only question I have, I should point out, is just simply about some of the streets. When I'm driving down Shoshone Street, and this is a paved street, as you understand, and yet it's rutted. I mean, it's rutted like a dirt road out in the country. How does that happen? Something there isn't quite right. That there are grooves in the street where the tires have been. And I don't know if that is from just excessive wear or heavy trucks, or is that because perhaps somebody put a base down beneath the pavement that really wasn't very strong. But I don't think that they'll have a problem answering those types of questions. It just seems to me that that we just got to. There's a new guy in the building, and they're just trying to figure out the schedule. And once that's done, I think we'll go forward with that. Plus, you got to understand. On most issues, I'm probably on board with them, if not 100%, 95%. 9:19, and we've got to take a quick moment to hear from some of our fine sponsors. That's coming up in just a few seconds. In the meantime, got a couple of other things too. Speaking of some other issues on the local level, we could be seeing sponsorship signs in state parks. That's going to make liberals angry. Oh, what do you mean we're going to have the Coca-Cola Park? I don't know about that. Well, I have some thoughts on that in just a few minutes, and I've seen it work elsewhere. So we may be able to put their fears to rest on that one. More coming up. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 44 at our studios on Top Story. I do have a bit more on that follow-up to the caller asking about folks coming in from city council, so we could, question them about whatever dealings they may be involved with. And I look at it this way. The show is called Top Story, and some days the top story may be a couple of guys swinging pool cues at each other in a local bar. But everywhere I've been in the last 24 hours, people are talking about this innocent prisoner. And if you're locked up in a cage, there's nothing you can do other than be innocent, being roasted alive by villains. And I'll tell you what, people have a reaction to that even here as well as around the world. And in vaccinations, for instance, local people get their kids vaccinated or not. So, yes, I would like to sit here, and I'd like some days to be able to talk to people about, city bonding so they can build a new firehouse or do repairs at the police station. But other days, the pictures coming out of that part of the world are just so gruesome and abhorrent. You can't avoid talking about something like that. And people want to talk about it too, because they have to. It's like lancing a boil. You have to get your reaction out. I do, however, have something that may not be considered local as much as just statewide. Saw this today, and I wanted to make a quick mention about it. Associated Press says the director of the Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation is seeking permission from legislators to allow corporate sponsorship as a way to bring in money for the state's park system. Now, you've got to realize it's not cheap to run a park system. I know this because I grew up in the New York State Park System. My dad was a park superintendent at 3 different parks, and he was the assistant at 2 others before that. So I know a little bit about how this works, and I know how it's expensive, and I know how when states are strapped for cash, running a state park is not necessarily a priority. And yet people come and they still want to be able to walk up the rock steps without having them crumbling. They still want to use the ball fields without having grass up to their waists. And so every once in a while, someone floats an idea about sponsorship for parks, whether it be at the state or the county level. And the reaction always seems to be, oh, how dare they do that? We're not going to have a big Coca-Cola sign, and it'll bespoil the nature out there. That's baloney. And I've seen it happen before. I've been through a couple of these arguments in a couple of different places. And I know that when I was a young reporter working in upstate New York, there was a serious argument about this. George Pataki had just been elected governor, and they chased away the leftist Mario Cuomo. And Pataki's new parks director wanted to do the same thing. But all the liberals I worked with in the newsroom were all screaming about how terrible it would be to have corporate sponsorship. in this beautiful, pristine park near work. And I thought, what a bunch of crap. Because not long after that, I ended up taking a television job about 70 miles down the highway, and I moved to a county called Broome County. BC, as it was called, Broome County. That's why they have a golf tournament, the BC Open, Broome County Open. But they needed someone to help sponsor parks because they were running into a wall when it came to taxing the public. And so there was a fellow who lived within the county, and his name was Johnny Hart. Johnny Hart had become rich. He was a cartoonist. Some of you may know Wizard of It, as well as his cartoon BC. You see it in the comic strip still to this day. He's been dead for a few years. But Johnny Hart came forward with a personal donation, and Johnny Hart put up the money for sponsorship of the parks. So you would walk into a park, and there would be a giant cartoon dinosaur standing there with a little balloon, like a balloon word above it, or words greeting you as you came in. I thought it was a great idea. It kept the parks open. It was also somewhat charming to see these cartoon characters greeting you as you came by. In fact, my daughter was more intrigued by that as a little girl than she was about the park setting in many cases. And as it turned out, in the city in the center of the county was a city named Binghamton. Actually, they had Binghamton, Endicott, and the third city, I believe, was called Johnson City. And the people who had founded Endicott Johnson Shoes had donated land to the cities in that area for parks, and also donated carousels. And the carousels were free. Children didn't have to get a ticket. They could just come and ride a carousel at any time. But all of the parks had been sponsored by the Endicott Johnson Shoe Company. And you know what? It allowed people a place to go in summertime and relax a little bit. And I never heard one person complain about a big sign hanging outside the park. So here we've got people in Idaho who are proposing an idea that is not new, probably, though, new here in many cases. And you're going to hear it from the lefties. They're going to start screaming about how this is just a pollution and an abomination of nature if we try and do this. Well, I want to keep them open because I like to go to parks, especially when the weather gets a little warmer. But I'd like that opportunity. And if someone is willing to come forward and relieve my tax burden by making a sponsored a donation or a donation for a sponsorship, I'm all for it. And good corporate citizens do that sort of thing. So I'm on board with this one. We'll have to see how it works out when the rubber hits the road in the state legislature. But I'd like to think right now that you're going to see a lot of people who would be in support of just such an idea. Got more coming up in just a couple of minutes. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, about 1/2 hour to go in our program. Oh, that story we were talking about yesterday, guns on campus and your state universities, most of them anyway, colleges and universities complaining about how they've had to beef up security and they want more of your tax money. Well, another neighboring state is thinking about doing something very similar. So apparently it works. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 44 at 9:30. We had a conversation, I guess it was a couple of days ago on the air, about several colleges and universities in Idaho going to the state legislature and begging for another $3.6 million in taxpayer funds. That is your money, so they can beef up security. They're beefing up security because we have now concealed carry on campuses. Well, not technically wholly concealed carry. You have to keep that, that pistol or whatever firearm you have locked up in your car on campus. It's not like you're walking around in the dining halls with, a sidearm strapped on, or you're walking around in a dormitory that way. But the administrators claim, well, we have to do this because of our fears that some of these nutcases who actually have these firearms will come shooting everybody up. Well, of course, the reason that we have the firearms is because the people who bring them are actually there to protect someone from a nutcase who might show up on campus. Of course, you've got to run all the way out to a parking lot to fetch your firearm if that happens, which, of course, is valuable time that could cost other people their lives. Came across a story today, and this is out of neighboring Nevada. Nevada lawmakers will hear the first details of a bill that would allow guns to be kept in locked or occupied cars on school grounds. So apparently people there have been watching what's going on here and think that it's a pretty good idea. Republican Assembly Speaker John Habrick sponsoring the bill that's scheduled for a hearing at an Assembly Judiciary Committee. It would allow firearms to be stored in a car on the grounds of any public, private, or college campus as long as the vehicle is occupied. locked, or if the gun is kept in a storage container. Current Nevada law makes it a misdemeanor to possess firearms on school grounds with certain exceptions. I was a commuter my first 2 years at college, and I was sharing with Benito yesterday that a lot of the other commuters who were coming to class were police officers who would get off duty or sheriff's deputies, and they would come to class in uniform and with their sidearms. No one ever said, "Don't you dare bring that in here," although today they probably would. But I always thought it was pretty cool. I had a cousin who became a state trooper he moved to Florida, actually, and joined a department down there, but he was working as a police officer on the local level, and he'd come in sometimes and sit with me in class. And so here's my cousin Chuck sitting next to me, and he's got a sidearm. I used to feel really safe about that situation. I thought to myself, ain't nobody going to bother us at this desk. We're pretty well set for the day. It says current Nevada law makes it that misdemeanor, but it says Republican Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore also plans to reintroduce legislation permitting concealed weapon permit holders to bring concealed firearms on college campuses before the end of this session. That bill died in committee, it reads, last session. Now, Nevada, Harry Reid even talks about his days when he and his brothers used to go out shooting and camping up in the mountains, sometimes for 3 or 4 days at a time. And at one time, he was actually considered to be a very close friend of the National Rifle Association. I don't know that he gets that endorsement any longer. But you have a state that pretty much has had a firearms culture for a very, very long time, as have most of the states throughout the Mountain West. And so we've got more and more people who are looking at this and saying this is not such a bad idea. We had a guest in here on Monday, and Steve Millington, in fact, was telling us that likely people have been walking around on campus with concealed firearms for a very, very long time. Now, my friends who were police officers, that wasn't the case. They had open carry, obviously, going on. But I didn't disagree with Steve on that point. When I was in my last couple of years at college, I had moved into a dormitory. And I remember there was a fellow named Max who lived in the dormitory. And so one day someone told me that Max was armed, even though the college prohibited that. Well, nobody ended up blowing Max in. Number one, he was a real, and no pun intended, straight shooter, really good guy. And the fact that he was living just a short distance down the hallway in our dormitory gave us a little more confidence that they would be safe if some kook ever came through. And the doors were open, on both ends of the building most of the day. And sometimes even after they got locked at night, someone would leave them unlocked and just jar them so some drunken friend could come back from town and stagger through the door. We had Max down the hall, and we knew if anybody had tried to pull anything, Max was going to drop them. He was a dead-eye shot. You're up next, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com with Bill Colley.
Well, I'm with you 100% on that, because most of the shootings have been in gun-free zones. Let's take Fort Hood for consideration.
Right. That's an old...
If I'm going somewhere, I won't go to a gun-free zone. I want to go somewhere where there's somebody with a concealed firearm permit that can protect me.
That I believe that Fort Hood designation, and that's been the case on bases now since sometime during the Clinton administration, where they decided that these people couldn't walk around with any live ammunition, so to speak, being the result that these guys were defenseless. I thank you much for the call. My friend, Scott McConnell, happened to be at Fort Hood the day that took place. It wasn't near his building, but he was sitting at a desk, and he started getting text messages from various people. And his family incredibly worried about him. But he told me later on, he said, look, you've got what? An Army psychologist who's probably not really a good shot, killing people at short range, point-blank range. He said, what if someone who'd actually been a trained marksman had been there and armed? Mr. Hassan there, or whatever his name was, wouldn't have gotten very far. He would have been dropped in a matter of seconds. 20 minutes from 10 o'clock. Of course, that would be cruel to somebody of a different faith. Can't have that. Look, more coming up. Marijuana business and how to get involved in it. I have often thought that marijuana is to younger folks in this country, or people on the left, some of the older folks, is equivalent to the in the Roman Catholic faith to the body and blood of Christ. It plays in a sense that same role in their lives. 944 is our temperature. Would you believe that? Kind of equal here. It doesn't happen very often. at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. You can reach the show at 736-0300. So I got an email today. Some of my friends back on the East Coast, of course, are aware that once you go west and you go to places like Washington State and Colorado, that we've had legalized marijuana. And of course, that brings along all sorts of new attendant problems for law enforcement and for healthcare workers and the like. People eating these marijuana candy bars and leaping out of buildings and thinking they can fly. And, well, it's a lot more potent than, I guess, what it was 50 years ago. Back then, people were just smoking the rope, and now it's highly concentrated. Some, though, are looking to take advantage. They hope, of course, with legalization coming in most states, they'll be working on that next. That's just the next domino to fall. And at a place called Anne Arundel Community College, that is near, I guess, Annapolis in Maryland. I drove by it one time. I had to go to a job interview. I was interviewing for a job at a radio station in another part of Maryland, but I had to go to Annapolis to meet the people at WNAV radio, which there were two stations in Maryland at the time that were owned by game show host Pat Sajak. And one was in Westminster, and that's where they had the job opening. The other was in Annapolis, but I had to meet people in Annapolis. So I got to drive in the neighborhood and some of the neighborhoods around there. So I got to spy this college. And a writer talking about something called capgaznews.com, whatever that is, says, start stoner-friendly munchie stands in Colorado or open a lounge near a marijuana dispensary in Oregon. Or try selling fertilizer to weed growers. Quote, opportunities are endless, whatever we can create in our heads, unquote, said Dean Warner, an Anne Arundel Community College student. The college launched Monday a class exploring business opportunities around the country's expanding marijuana market. Is this the reason that the president is trying to normalize diplomatic relations with Cuba and North Korea? Maybe we can sell them a lot of marijuana. Can you imagine that portly little guy with the bad haircut in North Korea puffing away on weed? I don't know. Maybe, I don't know that it'd make him any nicer or not. But we have colleges now that are saying, hey, here's an entrepreneurial opportunity. And sure enough, we'll have a dispensary here, and if people are puffing away, what we'll do is we'll open up a stand down the street and sell them Doritos and candy bars and popcorn, whatever, because they'll have the munchies as they come out. I guess that's the American way. But I still feel a little uncomfortable when someone is teaching this type of course. It's a bit like saying, casinos attract a lot of men, and a lot of those men don't necessarily have female companionship, so let's teach kids how to open up a brothel. So then they could open up a brothel just down the street. So when people are, they're sinning by gambling, they can continue to sin by coming down the street when they're done with whatever little money they have left and spend it here. $20 short time, $100 all night, whatever it happens to be. It doesn't make me comfortable. But I think because this is such a sacrament on the American left, it's okay to teach this course. Now, they wouldn't do it, if there was an opium den or a heroin den. I don't know that they'd be doing the same, but maybe that's the next step. Maybe what we'll do, if there's a guy who's selling, bags of heroin and crack on a street corner somewhere, we'll start advising young people how they can actually, put a flop house in down the street so the addicts can just come there and pass out for, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours. Or if they don't make it, maybe we can open up a mortuary next door as well. What a wonderful idea. We'll just capitalize on people's misery. 948. Well, it happened in China. It led to the Boxer Rebellion, as my history recalls, and people were actually opening up businesses to encourage this type of behavior. So it could, it was called mercantilism. It could actually enhance the British Empire. Unfortunately, it didn't do well for the Chinese. It left so many of them stoned and incapacitated or dead that finally somebody said, enough, we've got to get rid of these Westerners. Bad form, as they'd call it in the British Empire. It's 9:48. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning. We've got Mike Huckabee coming up in just a moment with a Huckabee Report, which will be brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Again, the Huckabee Report brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number, 736-6563. Huckabee, as I mentioned earlier, has been vilified in some of the European press. I saw some of it this morning. I get emails from some of the British newspapers, and they're very angry with Mike Huckabee because he's a preacher who talks about Christian things in his public life, and he's a politician, so therefore the two do mix. And he's now being called a hateful, rotten bigot because he's preaching the Bible. Doesn't seem to bother the man at all, though, does it? He's just very cheery every day when we happen to hear him. Well, he'll be along shortly, and then we'll wrap up in a couple of minutes. News will be coming up at 10 o'clock from the Fox Radio Network, followed by Rush Limbaugh. Following news at 1 o'clock, Sean Hannity, just about every day, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Thank you very much, Governor. 9:54, you're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, I just wanted to mention, again, Rush Limbaugh coming up following news from Fox at 10 o'clock. I'm sitting here, just got an email a short while ago, and it's a link someone sent me from a writer by the name of Jonathan Chait. Now, Jonathan Chait is one of these guys who doesn't mind being called a liberal. I know that they like to be called progressives now, but that's a judgment. That's not actually, that implies progress, and that doesn't necessarily match my view of progress. But he doesn't mind being called a liberal. But he is writing here today at a publication, and he is saying that political correctness is giving liberalism a bad name. I'm reminded of an episode of The Simpsons where an angry mob comes and demands that the little baby at the Simpsons house turn over a teddy bear. And they're threatening the family and they're threatening the little baby, and then they get embarrassed by their actions. And the doctor says, "We've given the mob the name mob a bad, or the word mob a bad name." And I think it's pretty much the same thing. But he's detailing a story about a student at the University of Michigan who wrote a satirical piece for his school conservative paper, where he said that he had fallen and a white cisgendered hetero upper class man helped him to his feet, and he said that he thought it would clear up our barbaric attitude toward people of left-handedness. With that, the student's room was vandalized. People decided to hang pictures of Satan. They threw eggs at his doors, spray paint, and everything else. And when he went to complain about this happening, he was treated as the perpetrator and not as the victim. And in fact, then he was told he was being fired from the newspaper because some people felt that he had created a dangerous atmosphere, and they felt that they were in harm's way while they were working with him. And the campus has now brought him up on charges as well before a review board because of his poor and bad attitude for writing a satirical piece and mentioning people of left-handedness. So this writer, who is an unabashed liberal, says, "I think that we're giving ourselves a bad name." And you know what? How long did it take them to come to this conclusion? Oh, about 50, 60 years. So it tells you they're a little slow on the uptake. Yes, a very steep learning curve among that particular part of our population. Do want to mention again, following Rush, coming up at 1 o'clock, Sean Hannity, and then at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Glenn Beck. All of that will be ahead on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Tomorrow, and I don't have my schedule here in front of me, I was going to tell you who was going to be joining us tomorrow. I do want to point out, next week we have a guest who's going to be joining us who's a very special guest. I think it's Wednesday he's joining us. Tuesday next week he'll be joining us. He has written a book about looking for heroes on Main Street. In other words, he had been looking around the country and hearing all of this talk about how the country was going to pieces. His name is Ed Matson. He's a Vietnam veteran. And he has written this book about his experiences just going out around the country and visiting small-town America and finding people who he believes changed his attitude. His pessimism became optimism. And we're going to have him on the show with us coming up a week from yesterday. We've had some hurdles to clear getting this lined up just from various schedules different people have. And then a week from Friday, I'd hope to do it this Friday, we've got a guest coming in who's going to explain the difference between a CV and a resume. Idea popped into my head the other day because I have a friend who hadn't had to look for a job in a quarter century and kept seeing this word CV pop up, which is an acronym for some Latin, and wondering what it is the job offer was all about and how they could go about writing a CV. So we're going to be joined by a guest, as I say, in a little over a week. It's going to be offering us some tips on that. And if you know someone along those lines too who could help us out now and then on some of these issues that perplex and vex people every day, give me a shout. Bill.Colley@townsquaremedia.com. And God willing and the creek don't rise, I'm back here at 8 o'clock tomorrow.